Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari. Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Girivaradhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Girivaradhari. Jaya Jashodanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Braja Janaranjana. Jaya Jamunnathirvanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari. Jaya Jamunnathirvanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Girivaradhari Girivaradhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Girivaradhari. Jaya Jashodanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Braja Janaranjana. Jaya Jamunnatirvanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Jamunnatirvanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Chari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Jamunnatirvanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Jamunnatirvanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jamunnatirvanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parabhajikacharya Svathalasara Śrīmad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder-Acharya Śrīmad Prabhupada Ki Jai. Śrīmad Bhāgavatam Grantharaj Ki Jai. Gaura Pramanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading from Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 6, text number 3. Tatachoktam na kuryat karhichit sakyam manasi hanavastite yadvijambach chirach chinam Chaskanda-tapa Aishvaram Tata Choktam Na Kuryat Kari Chitsakyam Manasi Hanavastite Yad Vijrambach Chirach Chinam Chaskanda-tapa Aishvaram Tata. So, cha and uktam, it is said, na, never, kuryat, should do, karhichit, at any time or with anyone, sakyam, friendship, manasi, in the mind, he, certainly, anavastite, which is very restless, yat, in which, vijrambat, from placing too much faith, chirat, for a long time, chinam, practiced, chashkanda, became disturbed, tapaha, the austerity, Aishvaram, of great personalities like Lord Shiva and the great sage Subari. Translation: all the learned scholars have given their opinion. The mind is by nature very restless, and one should not make friends with it. If we place full confidence in the mind, it may cheat us at any moment. Even Lord Shiva became agitated upon seeing the Mohini form of Lord Krishna. And Subari Muni also fell down from the mature stage of yogic perfection. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The first business of one trying to advance in spiritual life is to control the mind and senses. As Sri Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 15:7, Mamevamso jiva loke jiva bhutta sanatanaha manaha sastanindriyani prakriti stani karshati. Although the living entities are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord and are therefore in a transcendental position, they are still suffering in this material world and struggling for existence due to the mind and the senses. To get out of this false struggle for existence and become happy in the material world, one has to control the mind and senses and be detached from material conditions. One should never neglect austerities and penances, and one should always perform them. Lord Rishabhdev personally showed us how to do this. In the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam 9:19-17, it is specifically stated, Matra sasha duhritrava navivik tasano bhavet balavan indriyo grama vidvamsam vikarshati agrihasta vanaprastha sannyasi and brahmachari should be very careful when associating with women. One is forbidden to sit down in a solitary place even with one's mother, sister or daughter. In our Krishna consciousness movement, it has been very difficult to disassociate ourselves from women in our society, especially in Western countries. We are therefore sometimes criticized, but nonetheless, we are trying to give everyone a chance to chant the Hare Krishna Mahamantra and thus advance spiritually. If we stick to the principle of chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra offenselessly, then, by the grace of Srila Haridas Thakur, we may be saved from the allurement of women. However, if we are not very strict in chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, we may at any time fall victim to women. So of course, when we speak of, the Vedas speak in very concise language. So by saying one thing, they include all other similar scenarios. So, this verse includes all scenarios. For men, the object of sense gratification is women. So it's speaking in that traditional term. For women, the object of sense gratification is men. So that's included. Then there are others who are somewhere in the middle. And there are many varieties. So that is also, they also have their objects of sense gratification. See? So these verses is not a declaration of war against women. Nor should anyone see women as Maya. They're spirit souls, just like we are spirit souls. This verse, quoted in the Bhagavad Gita 15:7, Mama Vamsa Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatanaha. All living entities are part and parcel of Krishna. They're all spirit souls. That's how we see everyone. So all similar scenarios are included. But we're just going to, for the sake of the class, rather than going into every variation, we'll just speak in the traditional term. So please don't take offence. So here, of course, the main context of the instruction of all saintly persons, this is still Rishabdev speaking, yeah. The context of this, it's not that the objects of our sense gratification is the problem. Men should not look at women, oh, you're the problem. It's our mind that's the problem. So, therefore we have a lot of difficulties throughout the world. The problem is within the heart. Therefore, in some countries, generally, men and women, according to this, as it says here, they try to understand that each other may see the other as objects of sense gratification. Therefore, there's some voluntary, not associating too intimately, to the point where it's said that one is forbidden to sit down in a solitary place, even with one's mother, sister, or daughter. So it just shows the nature of the mind. And these restrictions are there, in all religious traditions. If here what Prabhupada is pointing out is that in some circumstances, such as you find in the Western culture, and you're trying to spread Krishna consciousness, some of these restrictions are not possible to institute, or legislate, or legalise, or anything. That free mixing between different sexes, there's so much you can go. Therefore, the ultimate where one, especially for social peace and safety, and also for spiritual advancement, the ultimate control comes back to controlling the mind and the senses. If someone follows religious principles and they don't understand that, they place more emphasis on the women being covered up, out of sight, out of mind, having no position, not allowed to be seen on the street. They can be beaten and tortured or shot, even sometimes for trying to get an education. Because, not understanding the nature of the day and age we live in, and it's just not possible to, in the world which has become very westernized, to fully segregate people. But in some places where they don't understand that the real principle is control of the mind, which is training from a young age, the only thing they understand is that, women should not be seen or heard or like that. But that doesn't work. Because, and especially it doesn't work, it may be helpful if it goes side by side with the, people controlling the mind. But if people are not trying to control their mind, you get an artificial sense of repression, and sometimes very difficult circumstances for women, etc. And you just have the senses just become uncontrolled anyway. So there's no benefit. You get people following really strict rules and regulations, which is very difficult in this world, and people are still having uncontrolled sex because there's no control of the mind. So there's very little value. In fact, it can have the opposite reaction. Things can be a worse situation. So, yes, there should be, in all religions, according to their different traditions, some level of, keeping, the persons who see each other as objects of sense gratification a little separate. That's helpful. It's a secondary process. It's a process that you sort of do as far as practical in this day and age until a person gets control of the mind and senses. Like that. Ultimately, now, then we come to that point. So, as to how a person can be, how do they come to control their mind and senses? So, the Bhagavad Gita teaches that the best way, the safest way for people to come to the platform where their senses are not always disturbed is that they follow the natural rules and regulations and duties according to their natural situation in life. So, if a person has desires that there must be some sex life in their life, they get married. Then, at least, it is that couple. Not that someone has sex desires and just disturbing everyone in society, with their uncontrolled mind and senses, just wandering around the streets looking for people to harass, or, in their office or in a workplace or what have you. So there is some regulation. There's a couple, and there is some. On a very high level, so that process of marriage, so therefore marriage is very helpful for any couple. It's actually very helpful for any couple because it actually allows, sex life creates a lot of disturbance when it's done irresponsibly, because what happens is children are born. And if those children are born out of sex life and they're not wanted, well, that's an accident. No one takes care of them, and they grow up to disturb the whole world. Their life is hell, and they create hell for others. So marriage is good for all couples, to regulate to some degree. At least that sex life is within, it is restrained, society goes on. And that austerity, in one sense, whether they know it or not, they're actually following the Vedic process, the religious process. So a lot of people say, I don't believe in religion. That's okay, you may not. But if you get married, even if you don't believe in God, you're following a religious process. Because it is a main stay of all religions. In fact, it's one of the contentions in Christianity, because actually there are evidences that Jesus was married, and yet somehow that has been written out of the history. But actually it was well known that in the days of Judaism, that it was almost impossible for a priest to actually be practicing and not be married. They would consider that not a natural situation. And he was actually practicing, coming in the Jewish line, and he was a minister of religion. And in that day and age, it was unheard of for a minister of religion to not be married, because they understood. In all religions, it's usually been a pillar that marriage is there. So even if people get married and they don't believe in God, still they're actually following all the religions are teaching that. They may not know it, and even they don't know it, they still get the benefit. Now there's a very interesting verse in that, in 12th chapter. Yeah. There's one little sentence you've got to remember out of 1,000. How many pages we got? There's about 700 pages. Where's that one sentence? That's where we depend upon Krishna. So it says there that I think it's verse 11. Right, verse 11 of the Bhagavad Gita, verse 12 of the 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita says, so first, the best principle, fix your mind on Krishna, on God. You may call him Krishna, you may call him Allah, you may call him Jehovah, it's the same person, different names. Fix your mind on God. All religions are teaching the same thing. Even though they're teaching the same thing, they like to fight about it. So, they're all teaching the same thing. Fix your mind on God, the Supreme. This world's not your place of sense gratification, to stay here just enjoying separately from God. Become godly and go back to Godhead. They're all teaching the same thing, and yet they're all fighting. Oh, no. So, now, if you can't fix your mind on God, okay, do the next best thing. If you can't do that, do the next best thing. Then it comes down to this, right? There's no real God consciousness, but if, however, you are able to work in consciousness of me, or God consciousness, Krishna consciousness, then try to act giving up the result of your work and try to be self-situated. So we see here that people, they give charity to hospitals, they give charity to hungry people. They're doing some giving up. The result of their work is not going to them, or even sometimes their family. They're sacrificing all that to a high cause. Now, Prabhupada says in this purport that in that respect, social service, community service, national sacrifice for one's country, etc. So, working for the social peace of society by getting married and regulating one's sex life, may be accepted so that someday one may come to the stage of pure devotional service to the Supreme Lord. And in Bhagavad Gita 1846, it is stated, Yataha prabhati bhutanam, if one decides to sacrifice for the Supreme Cause, even if he does not know that the Supreme Cause is Krishna, he will come gradually to understand that Krishna is the Supreme Cause by the sacrificial method. Okay? So actually, when people get married, that's the sacrificial method. That's for a higher cause, for the peace of society, for the benefit of the children of the society, like that. There's a higher cause, not just themselves, but for everyone's benefit, this marriage is beneficial. Or, other sacrificial works. By the sacrificial process, they come under the scriptures coming from the Supreme. Whether they know or not, they're going to get benefit and progress, because Krishna will make that arrangement. But especially if they understand, if within knowledge they're doing things, they may not have full faith in God, but still if they have faith in scriptures, what it says we do, then it's even better, even more advancement. But as they gradually come to the point where they understand, now, I am doing this for the Supreme Lord, you make then you get a full transcendental result immediately. Otherwise, most of the results are still on the material plane, but it's progressive, gradually to self-realization. Now, that self-realization, Prabhupada's mentioned here, 1846. So we're going to whip up to that section, because it's part of our conversation, that okay. That's it. Yataha prapati bhutanam yena savam idam tatam svakamana tad abhyacha siddhim bindati manavaha. By worship of the Lord, who is the source of all beings and who is all-pervading, a man can attain perfection through performing his own work. So as we started, if a person has a natural tendency in this world, and somehow they perform that natural activity with some intention that is for also the benefit of a higher cause or for the Supreme. Originally they don't know what the Supreme is, but they know there's a higher Supreme cause. Either way, if they do that, they gradually attain perfection. So and that is the Gita's teaching of the best way to keep one's mind and senses controlled, which is the first business, according to Rishabh Dev. As Prabhupada says, Prabhupada says in the purport, the first business of one trying to advance in spiritual life is to control the mind and senses. The best way to do that, according to Bhagavad Gita, is according to one's natural position, become properly situated according to the, if one has a tendency to live with a partner, there's a little license for sense gratification, do that, but dedicate that please the Supreme Cause. Like that. Now, what's very wonderful about this particular purport is that Prabhupada immediately quotes 15.7, which is the same verse quoted in this verse that we're reading from Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. So I'll read how he gives us a further realization of why he's quoted this straight away in the purport to our verse today, 6.3. So Prabhupada says, as stated in the 15th chapter, all living beings are fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. Thus the Supreme Lord is the beginning of all living entities. This is confirmed in Vedanta Sutra. Janmadhyasya tataha. The Lord is therefore the beginning of life of every living entity. As stated in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the Lord, by his two energies, his external and internal energy, is all-pervading. Therefore, one should worship the Supreme Lord with his energies. Generally, the Vaishnava devotees worship the Supreme Lord with his internal energy. His external energy is a perverted reflection of the internal energy. He is the supersoul of all demigods, all human beings, all animals, everywhere. One should therefore know that as part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, one has his duty to render service unto the Supreme. Everyone should be engaged in devotional service to the Lord in full Krishna consciousness. That is recommended. So we get this sense from Bhagavad Gita 15:15 that if we understand, if we look at every living entity, and they are part of the Supreme. So, therefore, every living entity should work for the benefit of the Supreme because they're part of the whole. They're not independent. So even if they don't know what the Supreme is, they should at least know, I have to work in harmony with the universe, if that's their Supreme. Or if the Supreme is their government, then I have to work. But there's nowhere that anyone is independent. They're always a part of a family, part of a nation, part of a community, and they always have to work for the greater cause because they're a little part of it. No one is the complete everything. So every living entity has to work for the greater cause or the supreme cause. If we take it that, my family is supreme, and then we realise, beyond my family there is, government officials, and then you've got the Prime Minister, then you've got demigods. As stated here, the Lord, he's the super soul in the heart of the demigods. Therefore above them there's Krishna. And so we get this example here, that even Lord Shiva, he become agitated. So it's saying here that because we're always controlled by either Krishna's spiritual internal energy, we can come under that control and protection, or we can come under the control and harassment of the material energy. Even Shiva is in that same position. And the Lord is the super soul even in the heart of all the demigods, including Lord Shiva. Therefore, he is supreme, Krishna is supreme. If Lord Shiva forgets his relationship with the Supreme, then he will also act, fall from his, everyone becomes fallen. As soon as we disconnect with the Supreme, just like so we have the finger as part and parcel of the hand, you cut the finger off, it has no value. It becomes useless. As long as we're attached to the Supreme, we have our value, a great value. Even Lord Shiva, when he became attracted to the Mohini Murti feature of the Lord, then he fell down from the platform of Brahman and could not control his mind and senses. So one may say, well, that's Krishna, Still, Shiva's reaction was was a sensual reaction. Our sex desire is utilized only in the service of Krishna. In that particular case, Shiva's reaction was just a sensual desire, but not necessarily in the service of Krishna. Therefore, it's a fallen condition. Krishna is saying, if you have connection with the Supreme, your tendency, if you're performing your activities but keep a connection with the Supreme, you're satisfied, because that little desire for sense gratification or the affiliations we have, the modes, the little contamination and attractions are satisfied. And that keeps us somewhat controlled. If a person artificially represses some particular desires without getting some sort of proper, regulated, authorized satisfaction for the particular attachments, it causes chaos for that person and chaos for society, because it builds and builds up and explodes out in a unproductive way. And it comes out in a way of frustration, anger, like that. So without control. Whereas regulated sense gratification, so people diet, a lot of people diet. If they follow a diet that they're getting sufficient food and nutrients and they're not hungry, they'll keep to the diet and they'll lose weight. If they go on a starvation diet, then 2-3 days later, a week later, it'll be they'll be raiding the ice cream tub. So it doesn't work. And then they're actually worse off than what they were before. And after repeated failures, then they don't even try anything. So, that regulated process. So we see, but as soon as we here also we see with Lord Shiva that no one, including the demigods, is free from being controlled by the Supreme. If we get protection from the Supreme, then that control is fixed up. Therefore, here we see also Subari Muni. Subari Muni was a great yogi, sannyasi. Yogis are great sannyasis and yogis. I think he meditated for 60,000 years underwater, something like that. And, for us in this day and age to sit quietly for 10 minutes, a day, sit in the one spot, a week, we just couldn't. 60,000 years underwater. But he fell down because there was actually one fish that was like the king of the fish under the water, and he particularly paid special attention to that particular fish. He was quite fascinated, quite enchanted by it. And the fish, of course, had many wives. So this was and it was that fish that Garuda ate. But when he saw the fish, mating, everything come back. So even after so many years. And what Krishna says in the Gita is this, is that if you try to follow the sattvic process that leads you ultimately to sannyas and renunciation, but the sattvic process in the modes of material nature is always contaminated with the other modes. That's the nature of the mode. Even after 60,000 years, if you're situated sattvically, the nature of the modes is that they will always come in like that. The only way that one can actually... So therefore in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, although he explains, one should follow the Vedas which recommend sattvic activities. That whatever activity we're doing, which is proper for our natural situation in this world, to work, raise a family and so many things, we try to do it not for greed, not for lust, not for anger, Yes. So everything we do with attachment to the Supreme. Krishna recommends the Vedas, all of the principles of the Vedas are generally taking us from the lower modes to that sattvic position of knowledge, where we understand, I'm a spirit soul, I shouldn't live in this world, I belong in the spiritual abode, I shouldn't be living in this world just due to lust and greed and anger related to this body. We gradually, the Vedic process brings to the knowledge, I'm connected with the Supreme. I'm eternal, I belong in that transit abode, so I should be, detached from that style of life, lust, greed and anger related to the body, and do things just for the satisfaction of the Supreme. So that's sattvic, that's knowledge. But that won't do. So even with Subhari Muni, even the greatest sannyasi, no matter how well they're situated in that knowledge, unless there's activity for the soul, they will succumb to the other influences of the modes of nature, because the modes of material nature are always competing. So even you are situated in sattva, tattva is always trying to override that, and will. And raja is always trying to override that, and it will. That's the nature. Therefore, to be situated in sattva, one has to be in Suddha sattva or Krishna consciousness, Brahma Bhuta, and the way to be situated in Brahma Bhuta properly is to have engagement for the soul on the transcendental platform. And that engagement for the soul is realizing that because we're, as it says in Bhagavad Gita 15:7, I am part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, I'm eternally His servant, as are all living entities. Unless I have that engagement, where is my spiritual position? So, we see that. Now, the interesting thing here is that, therefore, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, you're the true sannyasi and yogi. So people may think, well, what's Krishna saying? Arjuna, he's a grihastha, he's a military man. What about Subhari Muni? What about Vasishtha Muni? What about Lord Shiva? They're yogis. No, Arjuna, you're the yogi, you're the sannyasi, above them. So that's the mystery, because people tend to think, even in Krishna consciousness, even in Vaishnava communities, was it in here, right, we read in today's purport, right, that, let me get these glasses. So it makes sense, but then still, even in Vaishnava communities, even in ISKCON, people don't get it. Prabhupada is saying that in our Krishna consciousness movement, it has been very difficult to disassociate ourselves from women in our society, especially in Western countries. We are therefore sometimes criticised. But nonetheless, we are trying to give everyone a chance to chant the Hare Krishna mantra and thus make advancement. So, Prabhupada is saying that he was criticised. Even his own godbrothers, who are Vaishnavas, who have studied Bhagavad Gita, criticised Prabhupada because they saw some, not applying the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita. The ABCs, here are the big devotees. Where is the philosophy, where is the ABCs of Gita? That if someone is properly situated according to the natural position and all their activities are dedicated in Krishna consciousness, then they're actually situated as sannyas and yogis, the best of them. Now, so, for instance, where this is, Prabhupada says this, not enough books. Prabhupada says this in 18, say, look at this. So many quotes by Prabhupada. So many misunderstandings by people. Bhagavad Gita, chapter... Prabhupada says that in verse 5, acts of sacrifice, charity and penance are not to be given up, they must be performed. Indeed, sacrifice, charity and penance purify even the great souls. Now, Prabhupada says, there are many purificatory processes for advancing a human being to spiritual life. The marriage ceremony, for example, is considered to be one of these sacrifices. It is called Vivaha Yajna. So when, as we said, if people get married, Vivaha, marriage, Yajna, they're actually performing Yajna. Vivaha Yajna, it's called. It says, should a sannyasi who is in the renounced order of life and who has given up his family relations encourage the marriage ceremony? The Lord says here that any sacrifice which is meant for human welfare should never be given up. Vivaha Yajna, the marriage ceremony, is meant to regulate the human mind so that it may become peaceful for spiritual advancement. For most men, this Vivaha Yajna should be encouraged, even by persons in the renounced order of life. Sannyasis should never associate with women, but that does not mean that one who is in the lower stages of life, a young man, should not accept a wife in the marriage ceremony. All prescribed sacrifices are meant for achieving the Supreme Lord, therefore in the lower stages they should not be given up. Similarly, so then in verse 7, Prabhupada, Krishna says, prescribed duties should never be renounced. If one gives up his prescribed duties because of illusion, such renunciation is said to be in the mode of ignorance. In the purport, Prabhupada says, a sannyasi may perform a marriage ceremony to help his disciple in the advancement of Krishna consciousness. If one renounces such activities, it is to be understood that he is acting in the mode of darkness. So here, we see, I'll just read a few more quotes before I go on. But, now, in verse number 9, where Krishna says, when one performs his duty only because it ought to be done and renounces all material association and all attachments to the fruit, his renunciation is said to be in the mode of goodness. So Prabhupada says, one should act without attachment for the result. He should be disassociated from the modes of the work. A man working in Krishna consciousness in a factory does not associate himself with the work of the factory, nor with the workers of the factory. He simply works for Krishna, and when he gives up the result for Krishna, he is acting transcendentally. Now, in verse 11, Krishna says, it is indeed impossible for an embodied being to give up all activities, but he who renounces the fruits of action is called one who is truly renounced. It is said in Bhagavad Gita that one can never give up work at any time. Therefore, one who works for Krishna and does not enjoy the fruit of results, who offers everything to Krishna, is actually a renouncer. There are many members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness who work very hard in their office or in their factory or some other place, and whatever they earn they give to the society. Such highly elevated souls are actually sannyasis and are situated in the renounced order of life. It is clearly outlined here to renounce the fruits of work and for what purpose. So actually in our society, we make this, some of us make the mistake that we see, here's sannyasi, here's brahmachari, everyone flocks around, they're renounced. if this person's going to work, and they're married, and they live in their home, don't take any notice of them. they're just grihastas. Like that. Actually, Prabhupada is saying here, if they are detached and disassociated from that work externally, and everything they're doing is for Krishna, they are sannyasis. In fact, Prabhupada says, grihasta means paramahamsa, properly speaking. That's what we want. We want the grihastas to be on an equal level of paramahamsa sannyas with the sannyasis. No difference. According to the level of Krishna consciousness. Men, women, it doesn't matter. Sannyasis. The external should not be taken into consideration, but their surrender to Krishna and detachment and control of the mind and senses. Our detachment from this world means we have full control of the mind and senses. We can't say we're detached and have and still act in anger, jealousy, envy, lust, greed, and say, oh yeah, I'm as good as sannyas. I'm grihasta, I'm good. No. Or we can't even be sannyas and act, there's some lust, there's some anger, there's some envy, there's, jealousy of other Vaishnavas. Still, Prabhupada says in the Nectar of Instruction, they're fallen. Immediately you become envious of a Vaishnava who's preaching Krishna consciousness, you become fallen. So, this seeing, even Prabhupada was criticized. How could, even by Vaishnavas? So this is the ABCs of Bhagavad Gita. This is the teaching, Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. It's very simple, but our conditioning is we must see that saffron to think someone is advanced spiritually. So if we see Subari Muni with saffron, very advanced devotee. We see Hare Thakur, born in a Muslim family, what is his standing in Krishna? We may get the completely wrong impression. So, this teaching's very simple, but not always understood. And Subari Muni, why did he fall down? Because when Garuda came and ate that big fish, Subari was more attached to the fish than the Vaishnava. And he saw Garuda that there was fault. Instead of looking at Garuda and thinking, his only purpose in eating is to be strong and fit in the service of the Lord, but he's seeing, he's, eating that fish. I told him not to eat that fish. I'm attached to that fish. I'm sannyasi, but I'm attached to that fish. So much so that I'm going to curse Garuda and find fault in him. I'm a great yogi, sannyasi. He's just a bird. He's a bird that's eaten my fish. So it comes down to a very, materialistic view of a Vaishnava. And that offence caused him to fall down. For a long, long time. So, Prabhupada says here that, if we stick to the principle of chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra offencelessly, then, by the grace of Srila Haridas Thakur, we may be saved from the allurements of women or sense gratification, as I said, all objects of senses for everyone. However, if we are not very strict in chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, we may at any time fall victim to women or sense gratification, whatever is one's poison. So basically, as we should chant Hare Krishna congregationally, serve Krishna congregationally, and when we look at anyone especially devotees, we should see how they're devotees, we see they're engaged in the service of the Lord through the internal spiritual energy directly. Others, they're also engaged in the service of the Lord. No one can escape that. But indirectly, through the material energy, we see everyone as a servant of Krishna. This world is something like a prison. In the prison, the convicts are made to do all the work. So in this world is like that. So they're, although they feel they're working for themselves, actually, as convicts, they're made to do the work, to run the prison in one sense, do all the... So when someone's really sinful in this world, they become the background, the trees, the insects, someone's got to make the honeys, they can become the bee, someone's got to do that. But it's a punishment to be in those lower species of life. The ants, they're cleaning everything up, they're like little garbage men. Everything is made clean and sanitized by the ants. Someone's got, you see them even, everywhere in the toilets, there's insects, constantly, doing things. So they're all serving Krishna, but as prisoners. Everyone is servant of Krishna, either through the material energy, but the Vaishnavas, they're serving through the spiritual energy, and they're very, very dear to Krishna. If one causes offense to them, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, those Vaishnavas who have knowledge of me as being God, and that's how they perform all their duties in that Krishna consciousness, they're always in my heart. So they're always in Krishna's heart, very, very dear to him. And we come along and think, oh, you're just a woman, you're just a grihasta. In fact, Prabhupada mentioned once that his godbrothers sometimes referred to him in a derogatory way like that, grihasta, Because sometimes grihastas are seen as unclean, muchi, like that. And that's why they wear white. Because grihastas wear white to show that they're not, if they're properly situated, connected to Krishna, they're actually always suchi. In fact, they're more clean sometimes than others. Because, you can try it out yourself. You try to go through a day feeding a few children, cleaning them, wearing white, and at the end of the day, your white clothes are still white. Sometimes I get some of the younger children, even the teenagers, come up and help me do a fire yajna, right? And within 5 minutes, they got black all over them. I say to them, "Do you know when you'll be an actual brahmana?" They say, "When?" "When you can do ceremonies with me all day, and at the end of the day, your clothes are still white." So, grihastas wear, and actually one of the main principles of grihastas is to be clean. And it's a really hard thing to do. You're sitting next to your children, right? Say you've got one on either side. You might have another one behind you, depends how many children you've got. You're eating your prasadam, they're eating theirs. They got it all over their hands, their arms like that, and then they want to come up for a cuddle, right? So it's like, yeah. So within 2 seconds of being around children, you can become, So the trick is to always stay. So actually, grihasta means paramahamsa. They remain sattvic. Probably they do it, and that's very hard. It's harder to stay clean as a grihasta than a brahmachari, but if grihastas do it, all credit to them. And Prabhupada said, in this verse, in the Gita, he said that practically all men should, get married. And Bhaktivedanta, of course, says the same thing. And Gita says pretty much the same thing, Prabhupada says there's no such thing as a bachelor in Krishna consciousness or, bachelorette. You won't find that. What are the qualities of a bachelor and a bachelorette? They're not there. They're not recommended. Practically everyone gets married, apart from those who, being qualified for that and don't have that propensity, don't. That's also good. That's very good. Excellent. It's a fast track. But Prabhupada said, my Guru Maharaj trained up an army of sannyasis and brahmacharis. And then he sent them to preach and they failed. He sent them overseas to preach. They failed. Come back empty-handed. Took a few photos with dignitaries. Oh yes, that's the big trick in preaching. Get a photo, put it on Facebook, or look at me with a dignity. I'm a big preacher like that. But actually, nothing happens. So if something happens, then that's good. That photo comes with some donations for the kitchen, then that's okay. But if it's just a photo opportunity for one's own, self-aggrandizement, that's not very much appreciated. I guess the attempt is there. But Prabhupada said, I created an army of grihastas, and they preach successfully all over the world. And he was very, very proud, therefore, of his grihastas. And he did not look at them as something to speak of, whether men or women. He just saw them as very successful preachers who did what his sannyasi godbrothers couldn't do. That was the elevated way he looked at them. Not that, I've got these elevated sannyasi godbrothers, and then I've come over to the West and all I've got is these, hippie grihastas. No. They did what the sannyasi godbrothers could not do. That is their elevated position. That is their connection and dedication and enthusiasm and Krishna consciousness. How dear they are to Krishna because of their Krishna consciousness. And because of their Krishna consciousness, their minds are completely controlled and their senses are completely controlled because they're full-time, 24 hours a day, just thinking of how they can spread the glories of the holy name of the Lord. Like that. And therefore, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna doesn't recommend any process which is tainted by the modes of material nature, even the sattvic process followed by the jnanis and the yogis or the sannyasis. He recommends if you want success, just take the pure devotional service. And that is recommended in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 18th chapter and also in the 14th chapter. And I'll just finish with this final verse that, from the 14th chapter, verse 26. Mam chayo vyabhicharina bhakti yogin sevate sagganan samati chaitan brahmabhujaya kalpate. One who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. And as we hear in Bhagavad Gita, in the 18th chapter, that platform of Brahman allows one to engage in pure devotional service. If one follows the path of pure devotional services, it will quickly bring them to the Brahman platform, and on that platform, one quickly then, that is the platform of performing pure devotional service, and on the platform of pure devotional service, one fully realizes Krishna and all the varieties of activities in Krishna consciousness to be transcendental, and one is guaranteed to be promoted to the spiritual world, no matter how one is situated externally in this world. So I'll just leave it there if anyone has any questions or comments. Yes, that's right. So, two things are pointed out very necessary. One should be properly situated in either brahmachari, brahmacharini, grihastha, vanaprastha or sannyas, and one's livelihood as Sudra, Vaishya, Kshatriya, Brahmana, in those categories as they sort of play out in this day and age. So one should be properly situated in that regard. But one will only be successful, so that brings one gradually to sattva, etc. But one can only do that if one is Krishna conscious, following the process of Krishna consciousness. Actually, in Kali Yuga, you cannot be situated as a brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha or sannyas properly and be making some progress unless there's an element of Krishna consciousness. And the more Krishna consciousness is there, the more one takes advantage of that stable platform and quickly advances to the transcendental position. So, but if there's no sense of Krishna consciousness, still, as a Krishna consciousness movement, the Daivi Varnashram aspect indicates that we still encourage people to be properly situated in works that are not sinful, in sex life that's not sinful, etc. So we're not sort of fully recommending a complete Vedic process, but as far as what's possible to the principles. See, the Varnashram tries to achieve a purpose. So in our Krishna consciousness, you can't, in the Sankirtan movement, you can't properly establish Varnashram as it was in previous days, but we try to fulfill that purpose. That's the main thing. The purpose of the Varnashram, it does regulate especially lust, greed and anger. Of them, lust or sex desire is the one that really very difficult to control, the most powerful, and the one, when unsatisfied, turns into greed and anger and envy and hatred, etc., and violence. So controlling that lust is paramount. Therefore, we may not necessarily be able to fully facilitate marriage life in all cases exactly as it was in Vedic time, but we still promote that couples should live together and their sex life should only be with that couple. It may not be an exact Vedic marriage, but really, and there may not be any sense of Krishna consciousness to that, but still if they do that, as we said, it's leading in the right goal, because they are following sacrifice, or sacrifice the tendency to enjoy the senses, sex life unrestrictedly. That just causes trouble. We're not for that. The Vedas are not for that. Wherever that can be restricted, that's the Vedic process. Even though it doesn't appear like they're part of the Varnashram, still, wherever sex life is restricted, okay, it's just a couple. If they can come to the highest level of being a couple, where they only have sex life just for children, otherwise there's not, then, but the only way they can really advance is when there's Krishna consciousness. And with Krishna consciousness, the grihastas come to that point where if there's no more children, then sex life just stops. Or if they're still trying to have more children, sex life is only at that time for the purpose of children. And it is only by Krishna consciousness that one can practice that. but at least one is in the correct ashram to practice it. You know, if someone's supposed to be practicing control of sex life for the purpose of bringing children into this world because they do have a tendency that they need some sex life in their life, you wouldn't want to put them in the Brahmacharya ashram because that's not good for them. It's not good for the movement. You certainly wouldn't want to put them in the sannyas ashram with the leaders. That's not good for anything. So, where do you put them? In marriage. You practice what you need to practice in the proper ashram, not in someone else's ashram. And even if there's fault, it doesn't matter. And therefore Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita 18:45, he addresses that. Oh, there may be some fault. We don't see that in Krishna consciousness everyone is doing exactly things right or what have you. He says this, that in 48, every endeavour is covered by some fault, just as fire is covered by smoke. Therefore one should not give up the work born of his nature, O son of Kunti, even if such work is full of fault. Right? Now, in the end he says that the example of fire and smoke is very appropriate in this connection. When in winter time one takes a stone from the fire, sometimes smoke disturbs the eyes and other parts of the body, but still one must make use of the fire despite disturbing conditions. Similarly, one should not give up his natural occupation because there are some disturbing elements. So for instance, in Grihastha life, perhaps they're there ultimately for the purpose of Krishna consciousness. There's some sex life. It may not be completely all, there may be some slip-ups from time to time. That's the smoke. So one may say, oh, okay, there's some slip-ups in Grihastha life, okay, finish family life, now sannyas. No, there may be some smoke. Krishna's saying, still stay there, don't move. Rather, one should be determined to serve the Supreme Lord by his occupational duty in Krishna consciousness. Okay, there's some slip-ups, some failures, that's okay. I will become more determined through Krishna consciousness until I get to that point. But I must get there. There's no question of, vanaprastha or sannyas or brahmacharya. There's no you can't go anywhere else. Oh, there's some problems here. You can only go to another ashram from Grihastha if you master Grihastha ashram, isn't it? So you've got to stay there, despite the smoke. That is a perfectional point. When a particular type of occupation is performed for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, all the defects in that particular occupation are purified. When the results of work are purified, when connected with devotional service, one becomes perfect in seeing the self within, and that is self-realization. Even though the faults are there, Krishna says, you do this, as I'm saying, and connect your occupation or your ashram with me, the faults in there, the smoke will clear. Just keep the Krishna consciousness going and stay in the proper ashram. So he says that. Gradually, as it says in Bhagavad Gita 15:7, we're all parts and parcel of Krishna. That's my real identity. I'm the eternal servant of the Lord. By doing that in any ashram and connecting everything with Krishna, you come to what Lord Chaitanya says. I'm not a sannyasi. I'm not a grihastha, vanaprastha brahmacharya. I'm not a brahmana, kshatriya, vaishya, shudra. I'm the servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna who maintains the gopis. We come to that point. But not by saying, oh, there's problems in my grihastha ashram. Let me just go straight to 10th canto, Rasa Leela, and jump up to the advanced platform, what am I doing with all this, family responsibility and duties? It's just causing me anxiety, and the anxiety causing me to lose control of my mind and my senses. Let's jump around like a monkey and go straight to, let's just start preaching from the elevated books and forget all this. Not going to work. Simply become a disturbance to oneself, the movement, and the whole world. Yeah? Yeah, another question? Yeah?
It's regarding to the sense, but as control of the senses.
Mm.
And you mentioned also about Muni that because he offended Garuda and even cursed him.
Mm.
And I was listening one lecture about that because Swami Muni quite advanced in his spiritual practice, but because of the tendency of considering he's a controller, and Garuda didn't ask him permission to take the fish because he felt offended. I'm the controller and superior than him. And that caused him to even offend the Vaishnava, and as a reaction, he lost control of his
Certainly. That is an aspect that Subara Muni's pride caused him to offend. Actually, the Acharyas point out that there were actually a series of offences committed by Subara Muni. So there's one thing, there are several things, there are several material contaminations of the consciousness, such as pride and what have you, attachment. And also, ultimately, the point that unless Krishna consciousness is there, those other material contaminations, a variety of them, which associate with the modes of material nature, will enter even a great sannyasi yogi like Subara Muni. That's the point. But the Acharyas point out that there were a few different manifestations of contamination in the consciousness, such as the one you mentioned, but there are others. And he caused a series of offences. So, yes, sometimes we hear one thing in the lecture, but sometimes there's a little more to it. So there's more than what we've discussed in this class, and even what you've mentioned. There's a little more to that. You can look into that, it's very interesting. But the main point, of course, is that unless we're situated on the platform of we're trying to follow the path of pure devotional service, if we're doing that, we're fully protected. And when we are situated in pure devotional service, we're guaranteed go back to Godhead, like that, no falling down. Well, yeah. Is the connection between control of the mind and senses and Krishna consciousness is that Bhagavad Gita 15.7. We're part and parcel of Krishna. Our senses are eternally and naturally meant to be engaged in the service of the Lord. When that's not done, our senses have lost control or fallen from their position. So control of the mind and senses is more a point of our mind and senses again being in their natural position of eternally serving Krishna. Otherwise we've lost control of them, haven't we? They've been taken away from their natural blissful occupation and, come into the material world where our mind and senses are doing anything else but what we naturally should be doing. It comes back to that verse 15.7. And therefore, these basic tenets of Bhagavad Gita that we just remind ourselves each day. When we wake up, I'm the eternal servant of Krishna. I shouldn't be doing anything else. Before we go to bed, boom, 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 with the broomstick. I'm the eternal servant of Krishna. I shouldn't be doing anything else. If we remember that, automatically mind and senses are controlled. It's automatic. You don't even have to try separately. But if we don't have a sense that we are the eternal servant of Krishna, we have to take the slightly independent activity of trying to control the mind and senses, at least to progress to the point of sattva, and realizing that I'm a spirit soul, and then gradually fixed up, yes, I think I am the servant of the whole, and the whole is Krishna. But so we have to get to there, we have to control the mind and senses almost like a separate activity. But in Krishna consciousness, you say, I'm the servant of Krishna, mind and senses are there. They're controlled, everything peaceful, it's done automatically. See? So the long process without Krishna consciousness, very difficult, which can often lead to failure, as in the case of even Shiva and Subhari Muni. But the Krishna consciousness, from the very beginning, you're properly situated. Both materially and spiritually, in a natural way, materially and spiritually, and therefore it's a very safe and rapid progress. And just by being Krishna conscious, you automatically become the control of the senses. But the point is, even as devotees, we should be very careful that if our mind and senses are giving us trouble, it's because we're not properly applying ourselves to Krishna consciousness. And we should never let that happen. That's the point. Not that someone says, well, I've been a devotee for so many years, I've done so much service, now I'm very proud of my activities as a devotee, or I'm jealous, or, greedy for facility. But that's okay, I'm still an advanced person because I've got the saffron cloth, or I'm a sannyasi, so it doesn't matter, I'm, got some big GBC position. No. If that's there, the Rishabhdev is saying, you're in trouble. Because even after 20, 30, 40, 50 years, if that's come back, that mind and senses getting out of your control, watch out. So you may have so many duties to do as a GBC, as a big Sankirtan devotee, but your first duty every day is to make sure that your Krishna conscious is to the point where your mind and senses are controlled, in Krishna service only. And if you let that slip, and you're doing so many other things, the uncontrolled mind and senses can create havoc even for the devotees, if they let their Krishna consciousness slip. How do we know that our Krishna consciousness is slipping? Because I can't control my mind and senses. I'm subject to attachment, enchantment by the material energy. I'm subject to be jealous, envious, angry, like that. Okay, I think I'm a big devotee, but I'm actually going backwards. So, these warnings are there. And how many devotees do we see that sometimes fall? Either for a short period, in a big way, or altogether. Okay? Hare Krishna.